Hello. I have been asked to talk about black swans in cybersecurity. And, you cannot do it without starting with the cyber 9/11 apocalypse, right? Hackers taking control over critical systems. It's something that is realistically possible. We see, even if you just follow the news the last few years, you see more and more examples showing how this is possible, how various actors are getting close to it. And if it wasn't clear to the people in this room, and I believe it is, we should prepare for it, and we should do everything we can to prevent it. However, this is not a black swan. It is not a black swan because it's already spoken and already present even in popular culture, in movies, in series, over different stages. Everyone is talking about the next cyber war. So yes, it is extremely important to prevent it. It is extremely important to be ready, but you didn't bring me all the way from Israel to talk about trivialities. So the next thing I did was to think, okay, what is a black swan in cybersecurity? What would be a real surprise? Not something that we all understand we should be ready for. And this kind of, we were talking earlier today about seeing a holistic picture, something that is more multidisciplinary. So the next step I did was to think about the interaction between technology and cybersecurity as a technological problem and society. And at least for me, the key concept to explain this interaction is trust. And if you think of the evolution of technology over many years, we started with tools. I have a hammer, and I'm going to use it. Then we moved to machines. Think of a steam engine. We moved to control systems that control a few machines. We tell them, make up some equation, and then a few machines will do it together. And then, we're talking today about autonomous systems that basically we just tell them what's the goal, and then they go and they do it. And if you think of the human interactions throughout this evolution of technology, really it requires more and more trust from us, right? If I have a hammer, I just need to operate it. If I have a control system, I need to supervise it. But if I'm going to go on an autonomous car, I just need to let it go. I need to, in many ways, give up control. And that's what we expect people to do with technology in the years to come. We expect them to trust machines more and more and more, and to trust computers in ways that they weren't required to in previous years. And as you can see here, my dog has a trust issue with my autonomous vacuum cleaner. And really, if we try to kind of dig deeper into what is trust in a machine, then in cybersecurity we like to talk about three terms. It's very known kind of segmentation. We talk about availability. I have a computer, I have some machine, and I want it to do what I tell it to do when I tell it to do so. Then there is an integrity issue. I want the results to be as expected. I want it to do exactly what I tell it to do, and also I want to know the truth, right? So in order to have a trust, you need some integrity. And then privacy or secrecy. I don't want the machine to tell anyone else what I'm doing. Now, if you are often preoccupied with one of those questions when you use a computer or a computer embedded system, then we have a trust issue. And the next question is, okay, what is the cybersecurity industry doing in order to solve this trust issue, in order to promote? And many things have happened over the last decade, I would say. We're moving from being reactive. Okay, there is an attack, I'm going to do a signature, and then try to detect it, to proactive and predictive, right? To try to understand in advance what kinds of attacks are going to be and be ready for it. We're moving in terms of detection technology from a signature-based, which is very binary and unlimited, to machine learning, to anomaly detection. And then And then we're working also more and more collaboratively across the industry on more and more data in order to create better security. And the ruling paradigm for many years already in cybersecurity is that we're going to do whatever we can to prevent something bad from happening. We're going to detect when it happens and then mitigate. And this approach has been working quite well in some organizations that are able to afford the effort and to have maybe some more controlled environments. But if we take a global perspective and we look at how well is the industry doing, then we see that it didn't stop hackers from creating more kind of malware. And also the damage or the cost, and those researches around what's the real cost of cybersecurity are never an exact number, but the vector does mean something. And we see that they have been increasing. A more interesting way to look at it is to see how much money is invested in cybersecurity. That's what you see on the left part of the screen. On the right part of the screen, I went to Google Trends and saw how many people searched for the word cybersecurity breach, for those 3 words. And what you see is that over a decade, this was going quite dramatically upwards as well. So we're spending more money. The industry is spending a lot of money. The best brains in the world. But still, if you look at how people feel about their trust in their machines, then we can see they are more and more concerned. And I'm going to show a 1-minute movie that I apologize for the resolution, but I think it will explain why people feel this way. So this is about the attack in May on the NHS.
Down the front because they were going to open me up, not by mouth, since this morning. And then at 1:30, the surgeon turned up and said, unfortunately, we've been hacked and there's nothing we can do. We can't operate on you today.
They are a bunch of cowards sitting behind the screen trying to disturb people's lives. I had a lady today who had a severe back pain, which potentially could paralyze her down below her leg. We have to divert her to other hospitals.
We're having significant issues with our IT systems. We can't access any patient records, results, prescription requests. So we're here, the surgery is open, but we've got very limited services that we can provide for people.
We've had to print out all our patient summaries on paper notes so we can see the patients that we still have booked in.
So this was last May. The national health system in Britain was part of a pretty large ransomware attack. And I think the most interesting thing that we see here is it's not necessarily the worst case scenario you could think of, but it's really present in people's life. People went, they were supposed to do a surgery, and then they couldn't do it. If we try to assess the net damage, I'm not sure it will be as high as the damage for trust. And I was sure I was going to introduce a new concept today of a black frog, but Peter Ho did it before me. And so we know what's a black swan, but what I thought would be a black frog or a black frog in boiling water is that for the past few years, every one of those attacks I've been talking about is another degree in the water in which the public trust is being cooked. And I think that while we have the black swan catastrophic attack, just continuing this current pace of attacks where cyber is a big thing. People hear about cybersecurity. My mother and my grandmother knows what cybersecurity is. That's not a good thing for their trust, as we're going to require more and more and more trust from them when they go and use machines. So this combination of just the current pace of attacks that keeps cybersecurity in people's mind and in their life, as we've seen in the NHS video. But at the same time, the growing amount of trust we are requiring from people, that's where I see this kind of black frog. And I think one of the most trivial examples is the one of autonomous cars. So on the upper part of the screen, you see research done by Boston-based consulting firm, Altman Vilandli, And what they basically say is that many people worry they might be vulnerable to cyber attacks. 64% would not purchase an automated vehicle, and 57% wouldn't even consider riding one. The worst case scenario is that a hacker will be able to drive someone off the road. And if we ask more professional people, so not the layman, so that's a research done by Munich Re, global reinsurer, and 55% of corporate risk managers, so people that knows risk, said that they view cybersecurity as the biggest problem with driverless vehicle. So, you know, driverless vehicles are around the corner, as far as I hear from my colleagues. It's something we're going to ask people to go and ride quite soon. But then they keep hearing about those cyber attacks who may take control of the machines. So just not to leave you all pessimists, and I think that there are a few seeds. I was asked to think of both dystopia and utopia. So I think that cyber utopia is you know, making cyber small again, in the sense that it wouldn't be such a big issue. So yes, where we can do it, we should do everything we can to, you know, prevent, detect, and mitigate attacks. But we need to think, when we think of policy making, we think on a global or national level, we need to take the assumptions that it's not going to work all the time, and then how we, in advance, become more resilient, how we make it less important. There are a few examples. I will share a few of them in the next 7 minutes. All of you know the safe mode, right? Those of you who had any bug with your Windows or Mac, you know you can always go back to a safe mode. It's a tactic. You say, okay, I have a problem, but I can still operate in a limited way. Another example is voting. If you go to, I don't know, a power plant or a refinery, then, you know, every turbine would be controlled by a few logical controllers, and there is redundancy between them. And you know, they all get the same data, and they all get to conclusions, and the turbine would do only something that was agreed between at least 2 out of 3 of those logical controllers, of those computers. So it's a redundancy kind. So we say, okay, even if one of them breaks or hacked, we still have 2 and we have majority. And then some tactics of self-healing. And if I try to think of some steps we're seeing today in the field, then there is a notion of active-active in data centers. So that's something that grew up or that was kind of built after natural disasters. The idea is that if I have a big data center, I need to provide some kind of service to the public, and then I may have one data center, I don't know, in the US, and I may have another one in India. And the reason I have this other data center in India is because I understand there is going to be, or there may be, some disaster in the US, so I want to be ready to go back and operate from my Indian data center, right? And what many companies have seen, for example, around Hurricane Katrina in the States, is that they did have a backup data center, but it wasn't ready to go back in time, so they lost a lot of money, a lot of problems they had. And so the notion of active-active is that can move from one data center to the other in a second. That's a notion of resilience. That's a notion of saying, okay, if someone is going to take down one data center, in this case, it was conceived through you know, thinking on how you deal with natural disasters, but I'm still going to be able to operate. Another one is digital wallets. So if you think of what PayPal, for example, did to enable e-commerce, is that people no longer needed to give their credit card numbers to websites. And so they could shop freely, they could shop safely, knowing that someone who had the capacity is saving and is taking care of their credentials. And the last example is the one of Emmanuel Macron. So it's actually, I think, one of the most interesting examples in the field. When his team understood that they're going to be hacked by allegedly Russian state actors, and they saw the experience of others around them, and they knew that maybe they cannot prevent it. So what they did was that they built a very big amount of fake email accounts and fake documents and fake emails in their email server. And when they were hacked, the attackers couldn't really do much with this data because they couldn't know what's real, what's not real. When this data was published just the day before the election, no one could use it because who knows, there were things there that were proven to be false. So what do we know about the credibility of the entire thing? So when they understood, and while taking actions to prevent the breach, they also understood that they need to do something that would make it less important if it happens. And two last words about cyber and non-cyber resilience. So resilience has been a concept with us for many, many years. It has been that in industry, in disaster recovery, and there is a lot of overlap in between those two. And sometimes it is the same. For example, if I'm looking at signals coming out of different systems and I kind of able to say something about their integrity, then it's good for operation, it's good for security. But there are some places where it's not the same. If you remember the active-active example I gave before, that's very good in case of a natural disaster, right? Because you can immediately go back and work from another site. However, it also means those two sites are interconnected, right? So it means that if I'm an attacker and I got to one site, I can easily get to the other. So in this case, there is actually a contradiction between being fast to recover from a natural disaster and being fast to recover from a cyber disaster. So those kinds of thinking, again, resilience has been with us for a long period, mainly against hazards and natural disasters. And when we come to adopt those concepts for cybersecurity, we really want to think when it is the same and when it is not the same. So to summarize, Cyber Armageddon is realistically possible. The collapse of critical infrastructure is something that we should definitely not ignore. It should be part of our planning. And it's not a black swan because we are talking about it all the time in the field and also in popular culture. Trust in technology is the key for the adoption of systems. They require people for more and more trust, and that's where the world is going. And while people invest more and more money and human capital in cybersecurity, breaches continue to be a daily reality. Even if you are doing everything you can and you're doing your best work and you're preventing breaches, still people will continue to read about someone else who has been breached. And then the result of that is that we are slowly, or attackers or those attacks are slowly eroding the trust that people have in machines. And I think that no one knows, right? That's the thing with those kind of examples. No one knows when is the point where people will say, no, I'm not adopting those technologies anymore. But slowly, if you're using the frog in boiling water analogy, slowly this is happening. And if it happens, then we're going to lose all the huge benefits that those technologies are supposed to give us. And I think that's to summarize the last point. I think that the key to making sure that we have the trust of people, even in an imperfect world, even in a world where just because of the huge connectivity, we cannot secure everything all the time. The key is to make cyber security small again, to have procedures, to have technologies that allows us to live and allows people to know, okay, there was a cyber issue, but it's not my problem. It's a technician problem. It's going to be fixed in a second. It cannot really harm me because there are all those mechanisms. Thank you very much.